Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. If you're someone who really likes to get under the hood of the Indian economy, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking a monumental shift in India's macroeconomic data landscape. In July 2026, the National Statistics Office dropped a brand new, highly anticipated metric, the Index of Services Production. This index fundamentally changes how we observe economic activity in India, and it finally fills a massive, long-standing void in our high-frequency data. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the services measurement gap, introduce India's new ISP, look at the coverage in key sectors, dive into the methodology and data sources, untangle output versus value added, and finally, wrap up with limitations and exclusions. Let's get to it.
All right, Section 1, the services measurement gap. Let's look at the historical blind spot that made this whole index necessary in the first place.
Think about it for a second. How do you measure a sector you literally can't physically count? With manufacturing, it's easy, right? You count the tons of steel forged, or the exact number of cars rolling off an assembly line. But services? They're kind of slippery. How exactly do you quantify a doctor's routine consultation versus a complex surgery? You can't just stick an empty airline seat or a fresh haircut into a warehouse as inventory. It's a totally different ballgame.
And this intangibility, it created a massive measurement asymmetry for us in India. Services are the absolute powerhouse of the Indian economy, making up roughly 52.9% of gross value added in 2024-25. But here's the crazy part. Despite that dominance, we didn't have a high-frequency monthly output indicator for it. We were relying heavily on quarterly GDP estimates and a bunch of scattered proxies. While the industrial sector had the monthly index of industrial production, the biggest engine of our economy was flying partially blind on a month-to-month basis.
So, moving to Section 2, introducing India's ISP. This measurement asymmetry is exactly what the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, or MoSPI, sought to fix with their July 2026 release.
Enter the Index of Services Production, officially released by the National Statistics Office. What is it? Well, it's a monthly measure of short-term movements in the real volume of formal services output. The base year is set at 2024-25, which acts as our benchmark of 100. It's crucial to note that this measures real volume, meaning that nominal turnover data is adjusted for inflation. Oh, and it's released monthly, but it carries about a 60-day lag.
Now, you might be wondering, how does this compare to the Services Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI? This is a really crucial distinction. The PMI is survey-based. It's an indicator tracking business sentiment. The ISP, on the other hand, is built on actual administrative and tax data. It's realized output. So they aren't competing metrics, they are totally complementary. And if we look at the industrial side, to put it simply, the ISP does for the formal services sector exactly what the Index of Industrial Production has historically done for manufacturing, mining, and electricity. Put them together, and we finally have a much more complete, high-frequency picture of the Indian economy.
Moving right along to Section 3, coverage and key sectors. Let's see what's actually captured inside this new index.
Capturing every single service in an economy as vast and diverse as India's is incredibly complex. That's why this initial release is a trial or experimental index. Right now, the ISP covers 19 formal service subsectors, which represents roughly 60% of India's total services sector output. Not everything, but a massive chunk.
When you break down that 60%, you'll see the index is really top-heavy. In fact, just 5 subsectors account for over 72% of the total index weight. IT and computer-related services absolutely dominate with a massive 22.47% weight. Then you've got retail trade at over 16%, followed by wholesale trade, accommodation and food, and other highly weighted sectors like administrative and support services, banking, and road transport. Now, here's a little quirk of this July 2026 release. Because it's experimental, MoSPI is currently only releasing individual subsector indices. They've deliberately held back on releasing an official single composite number that rolls all 19 sectors together. They want to wait until the data fully stabilizes, coverage improves, and they can ensure absolute statistical robustness before giving us that one big aggregate ISP.
Okay, Section 4, methodology and data sources. Let's pop the hood and examine the statistical architecture making this all possible.
Everything we're discussing today was carefully constructed by the Technical Advisory Committee on the Index of Services Production. Their comprehensive report grounds this methodology in international best practices, basically aligning India more closely with OECD-style short-term services production statistics.
So where does the data actually come from? The heavy lifter here is high-frequency GST data, specifically GSTR1, outward supplies. For sectors where GST isn't a great fit, they pull direct administrative data from places like railways, aviation, and banking, alongside the annual survey of incorporated services sector enterprises. And what's really cool is the universe approach. Unlike the industrial index's fixed panel of factories, the ISP leverages the GST network to track a dynamic universe of enterprises in real time. It automatically captures new business registrations and closures.
But we do run into a methodological hurdle here: the deflation mechanism. GST provides data in nominal turnover, meaning current prices. To find the real volume of output, we have to strip out inflation. Internationally, the gold standard is using Services Producer Price Indices, or SPPIs. But India currently lacks comprehensive monthly SPPIs. So as a workaround, the ISP relies heavily on proxy indices like the standard CPI and WPI to adjust that nominal turnover into real output.
All right, on to Section 5, output versus value added. This is a super important conceptual distinction you need to grasp to interpret this data correctly.
We absolutely have to separate output from value added. Remember, gross value added, or GVA, equals gross output minus intermediate consumption, meaning the cost of the inputs used up in the production process. The ISP is strictly a production index. It tracks the output side only. So if you see an ISP reading jump by 15%, you cannot just assume services GDP or GVA also jumped 15%. It doesn't work like that.
Let's look at the math to see exactly why. Imagine real output grows from 100 to 110. That's a 10% jump, which the ISP would totally capture. But look at the intermediate consumption, the input costs. If those costs surge from 40 to 48, a 20% increase, they eat into the final value. In this scenario, real GVA only grows from 60 to 62. That's a mere 3.3% growth. So faster growing input costs can really squeeze your GVA even when output itself is booming.
Keeping that math in mind, it's time for Section 6, limitations and exclusions. Let's ground ourselves in the realities of this trial index.
While capturing 60% of formal services is a huge win, we have to acknowledge the gaps. Health and education are temporarily excluded, largely because they're GST exempt and lack reliable monthly output data. Ownership of dwellings and public administration and defense are missing too. Central banking is structurally excluded, though regular commercial banking is in there. And perhaps the biggest caveat of all, the entire informal economy. The vast unregistered sector of street vendors, small eateries, informal transport, and domestic workers remains completely outside the scope of this index.
Which brings us to a golden rule for economists and analysts. You must preserve an evidence dashboard. Treat each ISP reading as a really strong sectoral signal, but don't view it in isolation. You want to confirm it using services GVA, the PMI, employment figures, credit growth, and administrative sector indicators before drawing any sweeping macroeconomic conclusions.
But make no mistake, the release of the Index of Services Production is a total watershed moment. We're taking the largest part of the economy and finally turning it into a regularly observable metric, letting us track digitalization, outsourcing, and formalization in real time. As this trial index matures, its coverage expands, and better price deflators are developed, we have to ask, as India transforms formal services from a statistical blind spot into an observable metric, what will this new, high-frequency lens finally reveal about the structural transformation of the economy? Keep your eyes on those upcoming monthly releases to find out.